Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Sarah Siegel, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, the Harvard University Division of Science, and the Harvard Library, I'm excited to welcome you to tonight's event with Rana el Kaliouby with a special introduction by Harvard's own Melissa Franklin. Tonight, Rana is discussing Girl Decoded, a scientist's quest to reclaim our humanity by bringing emotional intelligence to technology. Tonight's event is the latest installment in our Harvard Science Book Talk series, which works to bring the authors of recently published science literature to our Cambridge community and beyond. Coming up in the series on Monday, May 10th, we'll host Alessio Fasano and Susie Flaherty discussing gut feelings, the microbiome, and our health. To learn more about this and our other upcoming virtual events, you can visit harvard.com and sign up for our email newsletter, or check out the page harvard.com/science for more info. We also have a Science Research Public Lectures YouTube channel where you can view previous talks you might have missed. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question at any time during the talk today, go to the Q&A button on your screen and we will get through as many as time allows. If you would like to buy a copy of Girl Decoded, there will be a link in the chat where you can purchase it. All sales through this link support Harvard Bookstore, so thank you for your support of community spaces like your local bookstore. There will also be a link to donate in the chat if you would like to give additional support to Harvard Bookstore. Your purchases and financial contributions make this virtual author series possible, and now more than ever supports the future of a landmark independent bookstore. Thank you for tuning in support of our authors and the incredible staff of booksellers at Harvard Bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support now and always. And finally, as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings over this past year, technical issues may arise. If they do, we will do our best to resolve them as quickly as possible. Thank you for your patience and understanding. Now I'm excited to turn things over to our partner in the Harvard Science Book Talk series, renowned experimental particle physicist and Harvard physics professor, Melissa Franklin. The digital podium is all yours, Melissa.
Hi, welcome to everyone, and thank you for coming out tonight. I have the great pleasure to introduce Dr. Rana el Kaliouby. She is the CEO and founder of Affectiva, a company involved in what is called emotional artificial intelligence. Affectiva, I said that wrong. Affectiva applies computer vision and machine learning to facial emotion recognition. It's sort of a digital library of facial expressions with a holding of 5 million face videos comprising 39,000 hours of video data and some 2 billion facial frames. Hopefully today we will learn how this amazing library can be used to give computers the ability to recognize our emotions so that they can tell when we are so frustrated with them that we may fling them across the room. The book follows Dr. El Kaliouby's story from her childhood growing up in Egypt and Kuwait, through her undergraduate years at the American University in Cairo studying computer science, to her PhD taken at the University of Cambridge. It tells how her serendipitous meetings with psychologist Simon Baron-Cohen, who studies empathy, and fellow students who suggest studying ways to teach children with autism how to recognize emotions in human faces, galvanize her single-minded research path from undergrad studying computer science to postdoc at the MIT Media Lab, working on glasses with built-in cameras and software that can read emotions. The book also follows her journey from a well-behaved religious super student and dutiful daughter to adult academic driven to follow her own ideas and independence. She has had strong mentors, both male and female, starting with her mother, who was a computer programmer, to MIT professor Rosalind Picard, who lured her to MIT. I have been reading this book for the past 2 days instead of doing my homework. The story is completely engaging, her life story filled with adventure, and her research fascinating and even better, very, very fun. I'm looking forward to her discussion today of her work and life story. I'm interested in her transition from being an academic to an entrepreneur, and the story of this marvelous library she has amassed and how it is used. There is perhaps even the element of danger in this story, in which we succeed in decoding facial expressions. Tonight, I give you Rana el Kaliouby and her book, Girl Decoded, a scientist's quest to reclaim humanity by bringing emotional intelligence to technology.
Thank you, Melissa, for the introduction, and thank you for hosting me today. Hi, everybody. Very excited to be here today. I've been doing a few of these, and it's always best if we can engage. So please post your questions in the Q&A box. I will get to them very, very soon, and hopefully this will be an interactive conversation. So I'll start with a little bit about my background and how I got where I am, if you like. So I am on a mission to humanize technology by bringing emotional intelligence to our machines. The way I like to think about it is AI and technology is becoming deeply ingrained in every aspect of our lives, taking on roles that were traditionally done by humans, everything from helping us be healthier and more productive, maybe driving our cars, hiring our next coworker, and the list goes on and on and on. And the way we think about AI typically is we're trying to build IQ into these technologies and these devices, but nobody's really taking a human-centric approach to how we think about machines. And so I've been on this mission to marry IQ with EQ for our technology and bring in empathy and social and emotional intelligence into how we interact with our machines. I first got on this path many years ago. Melissa alluded to a little bit about my background. I'm originally from Egypt. I was born in Cairo. A funny story about my parents. My dad taught COBOL programming in the 70s, which is an obsolete language at this point. But my mom was very curious about technology, and she must have been one of the very first females to take, to pursue a career in technology in the Middle East. So she signed up to take this class that my dad taught, and he tried to take her out on a date. Of course, she wasn't allowed to do that, and so she told him that, and he was like, "That's okay, I'll just propose and we'll get married." And he did exactly that, and that's how they ended up together. They moved to Kuwait, so I grew up in Kuwait until the first Gulf War, when we had to evacuate and went back to Egypt. And I finished school at the American University in Cairo, where I studied computer science. I had always been fascinated by how technology changes the way humans connect with one another. That's been a common thread throughout my career. And so as an undergraduate, I was drawn to the classes that were about human machine interfaces, that touch point between human machines, that friction. And I foresaw that machines are going to play an increasingly important role in our lives, and I wanted to be kind of at the center of that and play a role in crafting what that interface looked like. I was also pretty adamant that my career goal was to become faculty at the American University in Cairo, and so to do that, I had to go abroad, get a PhD, and then come back to Egypt and apply as faculty. And so I did exactly that. I applied to all sorts of universities and got into Cambridge University at the computer science department, where essentially I got to Cambridge and I realized, I had this aha moment, right? Like I realized that I was spending more time interacting with my device than I was interacting with other human beings. It was my first experience living abroad. Yet this device, despite this intimacy, it was kind of a one-sided relationship. It had, it kind of knew a lot about me, but at the same time, it had absolutely no clue how I was feeling. And there were many days when I would be stressed because of an upcoming deadline, or I felt really lonely and down, and this machine would just be clueless. And even worse, it was the main conduit of communication with my family back home. And once again, I realized that it was stripping out all of the richness of face-to-face communication and kind of distilling that down into like, text messages or emails. And I felt that I felt really disconnected. I felt that machines provided an illusion of a connection, but it wasn't a real human connection. And so that all got me thinking and got me asking the question, what if technology could understand human emotions just the way we do? Just the way if my mom walked into the door and she can quickly discern if something's wrong because she can read my nonverbals. So that became kind of my obsession. And it set me on this journey to try and program emotionally intelligent machines. To do that, actually, the very first presentation I gave at Cambridge, I posed the challenge to my fellow, peers and I said, I'm trying to teach a computer how to read emotions, and it's pretty complex because the face is a complex channel of information. There's a lot of facial muscles and a lot of movements. How do I do that? And somebody in the audience said, you ought to look into autism, because my brother has autism and he really struggles with nonverbal communication as well. And so it turns out Cambridge hosts one of the top research institutions for autism, the Autism Research Center. And I got connected with Professor Simon Baron-Cohen, who was Sacha Baron-Cohen's cousin. And he at the time was amassing this new database for autistic kids to help them understand, and kind of, it was like a dictionary of all the different emotions that we can express both via our face, but also through our voice. So I started researching this whole new world of the science of emotions from a psychology standpoint. And I quickly learned a few things, that the science, first of all, that only 10% of how we communicate is in the actual choice of words we use. 90% is nonverbal. So the entire industry, the entire world with which we communicate via email, via text, is really just a small portion of how we essentially as humans have evolved to express ourselves. And so I'm in the business of trying to build algorithms that can capture that 90% of communication when we are connecting digitally. And of course, the last year in particular with the pandemic has made this front and center, because we're all connecting and communicating digitally. I mean, one example is right now we have 60 people attending this event. If we were all together at the Harvard store, we would, I would kind of get a sense of the energy in the room, and I would be able to riff off of that and build on that and personalize my message depending on the audience and their response. It is so hard to do this when we are connecting and communicating digitally in this way. Of course, I'm grateful because we're connecting in the first place, but I really think of this as 1.0, and we're going to see a lot of innovation built on top of these video conferencing platforms that incorporates emotional intelligence and emotion AI, so that we have more of a sense of a shared experience. And I'll give some examples of how we're doing that in a second. So the core technology essentially leverages any camera sensor, like any camera on any of our devices. And mind you, when I started doing this, that was the world where webcams were big and blurry and slow. We didn't have smartphones, right? This is the year 2000, so 20 plus years ago. We didn't even have we didn't have smartphones. Cameras were not as ubiquitous. So it was a different world, but I was projecting that this is going to be ubiquitous at some point in the future. And sure enough, it has become a lot more ubiquitous. So the idea is we leverage all of these camera sensors with people's permission. Opt-in is really key for us. And then we build algorithms that use machine learning, computer vision, deep learning, and gobs and gobs and gobs of data to train these algorithms to recognize these different expressions. So for example, if I wanted to teach a machine to tell the difference between a smile and a smirk, they both kind of involve the lower half of the face, but they have very different meanings. So we amass a database or examples of hundreds of thousands of people smiling and hundreds of thousands of people smirking. And we feed it to the deep learning or the convolutional neural network, and the neural net learns the difference between a smile and a smirk. And so the next time we give it an example of maybe somebody it's never seen before, it's not in the database, it's able to say, that looks like a smile, or ooh, that's like an eyebrow raise. As it turns out, so I focus on the face. If you think about this, 90% of how we communicate is nonverbal. About a third of that is expressed via the face. So the face is an extremely rich canvas for communicating social states, emotional states, cognitive states. And the science of the face and how we express using our face has been around for over 200 years. So this scientist Duchenne, he used to electrically stimulate all of the different facial muscles to study the face. We don't do that anymore, thankfully. And then Charles Darwin wrote an amazing book on the expression of emotions in man and animals, which was a real guide in terms of how I built my kind of my research hypothesis. And then in the 1970s, Paul Ekman and his team out of UCSF, he published the facial action coding system, which is essentially a scoring manual for mapping every facial muscle to a code. So for example, the zygomatics muscle is action unit 12, and it's what we use when we smile. This is action unit 4, it's the corrugator muscle, and so on. And to become a certified face reader or fax coder, you had to go through 100 hours of training. And it's pretty time intensive. And then it takes you about 5 minutes to code any minute of video. So say I wanted to code the video of, I don't know, a certain news segment of an interview between two people. You'd have to play it in slow motion, and you would basically watch for these different facial expressions and say, oh, I see action unit 1 + 2 + 12 or 6 + 17, right? So time intensive. And so instead, we're using deep learning to automate a lot of that process. And when we first started, the algorithm could recognize maybe 3 expressions. It could do smile, brow furrow, and eyebrow raise. And now it has a repertoire of over 30 different states. It can do, these building blocks of facial expressions. It can do combinations of facial expressions and map them to emotional states. It can do things like attention, drowsiness, fatigue, distraction. And we're continuously adding more and more states to the repertoire of the system. So I think of it as kind of a toddler that's still learning emotions. So there's a long way to go. But to me, that's exciting. That's what makes it exciting. So that was kind of what I was building at Cambridge University. And towards the end of my PhD, very serendipitously, I was essentially planning to complete my PhD, go back to Egypt. At that point, I had gotten married, and my husband at the time was based in Cairo because he couldn't move to Cambridge. So we were in this long distance relationship. I'd had my daughter. She's about to turn 18 now. So that was, I had her in my first year as a student, as a PhD student. So I was kind of anticipating finishing my PhD and going back to Egypt finally to be reunited with my husband. It was quite unusual for kind of a nice Egyptian girl and a Middle Eastern woman to just kind of, head out to a new country and pursue her career. So there was a lot of pressure on me to head back home. But towards literally a few months before graduation, we got an email at the lab, and it was this MIT professor who I'd been following for years. I'd read her book, and she was my role model. So she was visiting Cambridge, giving a talk, and she said, I have an hour free, and I just want to meet some PhD students at the lab. So I signed up for a slot, spent a good few weeks preparing for that meeting because I wanted to leave a good impression. And Roz and I met. Professor Rosalind Picard. So Roz and I met, and we totally hit it off. And she said, why don't you come work with me as a postdoc at MIT? And of course, for me, that was a dream come true. But I also told her, but I have this husband back home and I need to go back. And she said, that's okay. Commute from Cairo. And so that started my 3-year commute between Cairo, Egypt, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I did that every few weeks. I would go back and forth. And the project that brought me over to MIT was a National Science Foundation grant, where essentially she and I agreed that this technology is really powerful, but it's not really about human-machine interfaces. Fundamentally, it's about improving human connections. And kind of an extreme example of where the technology can be helpful is with autism, right? If we could take this technology that can understand facial expressions and map it to a number of emotional states and package it into a pair of glasses. And then it could, the child with autism or the individual with autism could wear these glasses, and it would, he or she would get real-time feedback on the nonverbal cues of the person they're interacting with. It would act as a prosthetic device and help augment their emotional intelligence and social skills. So that was the proposal we wrote for NSF. And I remember we were asking for maybe $300,000 to fund the project. And at that time, I had finished my PhD and gone back to Cairo, and we were waiting to hear back from NSF. And NSF loved the idea. They said it was great. It was potentially truly transformative, great potential impact. They also acknowledged that if there were anybody in the world that could build it, we were the right team. But they said it's too ambitious, it's impossible. And I remember, getting a call from Roz. I was in Egypt and thinking, that's it. That's my, that basically killed my dream to get to MIT. And Roz called and she said, they love the idea, but they just think it's impossible. So let's build it first and then reapply. And that's exactly what we did. She cobbled a little bit of funding here and there to bring me over as a postdoc at MIT. And we started building that. We partnered with a school for autistic kids in Providence, Rhode Island, the Groden Center. And we literally put together, this was way before Google Glass existed, but we had this pair of glasses. We had to source really tiny cameras. And so the place where we found those were spy cameras, and we kind of implemented it in the glasses, and again, pre-smartphones. So we had to attach it to a laptop. It was a lot of hacking, and a lot of creativity and a lot of design thinking, but we built it in tandem with these kids. Like it was a participatory design thinking approach where they had a say in what the system looked like. And we were starting to see these kids improve as they use these devices. We were starting to see, a lot of them were teenagers, start to do a lot more face and eye contact, which was awesome. And then towards the end of that grant, we were getting ready to apply for a larger grant. And very quickly, we started to see a pattern. There was a lot of commercial interest in the technology. So at the Media Lab, we would host twice a year what we called Sponsor Week, or internally we called it Demo or Die, because we had to show up with an actual working prototype of our technology, like no PowerPoints were allowed. And so for a number of years in a row, twice a year, we would host all these Fortune 500 companies. I would demo our autism, glasses. And these companies wanted to buy the technology. So Pepsi wanted to use the technology to test their latest and greatest products and services and flavors. Bank of America wanted to understand customer experience and improve it. Toyota wanted to measure driver drowsiness and distraction. And so I literally kept a logbook of all of these different use cases until the list reached about 20. And I was like, Roz, we're ignoring these industry sponsors of the lab. Like, we're pissing them off. Like, what are we going to do about that? So we made an appointment with the Media Lab director at the time, Frank Moss. And we said, Frank, you need to give us budget to bring on, 10 more PhD students. And he thought about it and he said, this is not a research challenge anymore. This is a commercialization opportunity. You guys ought to spin out. And I had this knee-jerk reaction, like, whoa, wait, I'm about to apply to faculty. But then I thought about it, and the tipping point for me was recognizing that we had a very unique opportunity to take a technology that, we were very passionate about and bring that to the world at scale. And so in 2009, we co-founded Affectiva on this mission to humanize technology. There are a lot of use cases of the technology, everything from autism, which we still explore through a partnership with a company called Brainpower. It's another local a Boston-based company that uses Google Glass, because it does now exist, with our technology to help individuals on the autism spectrum. And they have about 400 of these glasses deployed across families in the United States. And they're in the midst of a clinical trial to see, we're seeing improvement. But the question is, when you take away the glasses, does the learning generalize beyond actually wearing the device? So very, very impactful and transformative work. But we also do a lot of work in the automotive industry, helping roads be safer by helping automotive car makers track and identify driver state, and then have the car intervene to help keep people safe. So that's a whole new industry. There's a lot of applications in mental health, which I'm very passionate about, even though my company, we don't necessarily focus on health tech, but it's a great use case for the technology. We know that there are facial and vocal biomarkers of depression and stress and anxiety. And given the fact that we are kind of tethered to our devices, it's an opportunity to capture a baseline for the individual. And if you start deviating from that baseline, you could flag it to the person or a doctor or a loved one with their permission. So a lot of applications there, a lot of applications around conversational interfaces and social robotics and the future of, the Internet of Things. You can imagine how these devices can have an emotion chip that can detect your mood and help personalize and recommendations, for example, or motivate behavior change. My favorite example, which is, again, the pandemic has made that really has underscored the importance of this particular use case. Imagine if your fridge had a mood chip or an emotion chip, and it knows that you've had, you're stressed because of an upcoming deadline or a talk, but it also knows that you've been binge eating, 4 tubs of Ben and Jerry's ice cream already. And so for the 5th one, it says, nope, you're not getting any more, and it locks down. So there are, you can start, the sky's the limit in terms of the use cases. But I also want to acknowledge that I'm not naive about this, and I know that this can go terribly, terribly wrong. When Roz and I started Affectiva, we put in place a number of core values, which we essentially use to make business decisions. So we, for example, decided very early on that privacy is a core value of ours. Consent is another core value of ours. We just do not engage in work or industries where people do not have an opportunity to explicitly say, yep, I'm okay with you taking this data or tracking this information. And it has meant that we have turned down millions and millions of potential revenue and funding. I remember in 2011, we had raised a seed round of funding, but we were, in the market to raise an additional round of capital, and we were 2 months away from not making payroll. So it was already kind of stressful. And we got approached by the venture arm of an intelligence agency. Sorry, excuse me. And they said, we've been tracking the company. We are very interested in the work you're doing. We want to apply, we want to give you lots of funding, millions and millions of dollars of funding, on the condition that you pivot the company to surveillance and security and lie detection. And, I remember going back home that night and thinking about it and just kind of simulating what the world would look like if we did that pivot. And it was just so not in line with our core values. And so we went back and turned down the funding, not knowing if we were going to continue to live and survive, but we doubled down and were able to find investment from investors that share our core values and our mission for the future. So, and we routinely get asked or get inbound interest from different governments who want to use our technology for, again, in ways that we think breach our privacy. And I see ourselves as the stewards of this new tech category. And I think of our stakeholders, of course, as our investors and our employees and our customers, but the broader society. And I really do spend a lot of my mind share advocating for the right use cases, but also partnering with organizations like the Partnership on AI, which was started by the tech giants like Google and Microsoft and IBM, as well as ACLU and Amnesty International and startups like Affectiva. And I am part of the Fair, Accountable, Transparent, and Ethical AI Committee. And at some point last year, we took on an initiative where we tried to identify what are all the different use cases of emotion AI. And we literally built a table like, okay, use case number 1, here are some of the unintended consequences. Here's how we think it could go wrong. And here's how we're going to attempt to guard against that as an industry. So it was a very proactive approach. We do advocate for thoughtful regulation, but we're not sitting around waiting until this regulation and legislation happens. We are really trying to set a high bar for the industry, and lots of work to do there, but it's something I'm very passionate about. And then I'll just finally say, one of the biggest issues in the tech we're building today around emotion AI is bias, is the issue of bias. And and almost accidentally building bias into these algorithms, because we each have our own blind spots. And so as we sit and curate data to train these algorithms with, if we're not careful, we can quickly replicate the biases that exist in society. Only now we've deployed them, in across at least 90 countries around the world, which is where Affectiva operates. So we take that very seriously. And it starts with the diversity of the data and how we are able to ensure that it's diverse across gender, age, ethnicity, but also things like wearing the hijab or having, a beard or glasses or sunglasses. Facial masks was another one. We had to retrain all of our algorithms to, in the last year to because we're all in masks, so to kind of work and be robust to facial masks. But at the end of the day, it all starts with the diversity of the team. And so I'm a huge advocate for just ensuring that technology is more diverse. We need more diverse voices around the table, thinking about these algorithms, thinking about the use cases, identifying blind spots that each of us might have to ensure that this works for all of us. So that's definitely something I'm very passionate about. And so the book is really just a juxtaposition of my personal journey intertwined with the journey of this technology, and I write very vulnerably about my experience kind of growing up in the Middle East and making my way to the US. All right, so I see we have a lot of questions.
I think now is a time to ask some questions. So first off, what do you think is the biggest challenge of emotional AI, effective computing, both technical and human?
So the biggest kind of technical challenge is just getting access to the right data. For example, we know that there are facial and vocal biomarkers of depression, but how do you get truly diverse data that allows us to build a depression classifier or a pain class? Pain is another great one. I mean, literally the gold standard in pain detection today. And, if you go to a doctor's office or a hospital, they say, oh, on a scale from 1 to 10, how much pain are you in? It's so subjective. But we have an opportunity to build these automated pain classifiers, but we need gobs and gobs of data. So data, I would say, is the biggest kind of technical challenge to overcome. And then from a human challenge, it's acceptance, right? It's ensuring that we are taking a very thoughtful approach to how we're building this, and that there's value in if people want to share this data, they're getting something in return for it. Right now, there's an asymmetry in tech at large, where it's a few number of companies and governments have access to a ton of data about us, and we don't have any say in it. We don't have any control of it. So we're trying to rebalance that. That's not just emotion AI, but that's kind of AI at large.
There are a few more questions that do deal with different challenges. One of them, Barry asks, you seem very connected to emotions and to have great social awareness. However, that's not true of many computer professionals. Is that a challenge in recruiting employees and dealing with colleagues in emotional AI?
Oh, that's a great question. It's interesting. I'm trying to think. I mean, so I did my postdoc at MIT, right, where there was definitely an unfair or like an unequal distribution of individuals who skewed kind of higher on the cognitive intelligence and maybe less on the emotional intelligence spectrum. And maybe that kind of highlighted some of why our work is important. But also there were a lot of skeptics. I mean, I remember, and Roz will talk to that too, because she spent a lot more time earlier in her career at MIT, where there's a lot of pushback. I mean, people were like, why give machines emotions? Like, why do we need emotions anyways, right? And in fact, when Roz and I spun out of MIT and we were doing our first round of funding, we did the whole Sand Hill Roadshow in the Bay Area, where we met with a lot of venture capitalists, and all of them were older white men, and a lot of them were fascinated by what we did, but we avoided the word emotions altogether. We call it was the E word. We never talked about it. because I think there's this perception that it's more feminine. I will say though, if you look at the breakdown of Affectiva's team, even though, we're a female founded company and we're in the business of emotion recognition, we still struggle with gender parity. Like we have a lot more men on our team than we do have women. It's still a struggle. So I guess we're not just attracting women, we're also attracting super awesome guys. Some of them are, more emotionally intelligent than others, but I guess I see the value. Yeah.
So we have two questions that are pretty similar, and I wonder if your background coming from multiple cultures can maybe speak to this. One asks, don't different facial expressions have different meanings in different cultures? And somebody else asks, what are the cultural differences that you find in emotional expressions and categories across the globe, especially regarding Paul Ekman's foundational research, which has been challenged recently as oversimplifying and universalizing emotions by
Yeah.
psychological constructionist Lisa Feldman Barrett and her colleagues?
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Lisa's work, so let me explain. So Paul Ekman did a lot of things. He did the facial action coding system, which I think is a lot more widely accepted than his other work, which is the theory of basic emotions. So the facial action coding system is very objective. It literally maps every facial muscle to a code. It doesn't assign a meaning to it. It just says, oh, you activated this muscle or this muscle or this muscle. His other body of work, which is a lot more controversial, is he's basically posited that there are 6 or 7 basic emotions, right? Happy, sad, anger, fear, disgust, and contempt. I think I'm missing one. But I and this is where there's a lot. It's a very kind of simplistic view of facial expressions of emotions, because it's also been super simplified to, if you smile, then you're happy. If you furrow your eyebrows, then you're angry. And we all know that that's not true. I can be smiling and not necessarily be happy. I can be happy and not necessarily be smiling, right? So I take a much more kind of in Lisa's camp, where I think we need to be a lot more thoughtful about the complexity of these nonverbal signals. They don't often just mean emotions. They can be social signals. I can smile or I can raise my eyebrow, not because I'm surprised, but it's like I'm acknowledging that you're here, right? And also the way humans do it is we take a multimodal approach. Like we try to incorporate variety of channels of information. What did you say? How did you say it? Like, what was your posture? What was your gesture? What do I know about you? What were you doing? Right? Like all of this information becomes really key. And Lisa's work is about advocating for this much more thoughtful interpretation of facial expressions. And it's one that I believe in too. My PhD work, 20 years ago was all about this complex mapping of the underlying building blocks of an emotion, like a facial expression, to these complex human and cognitive states. So that kind of answers that part of it. The cross-cultural is fascinating. We have so far, and since I wrote the book, we've doubled this. We have over 10.5 million facial responses from 90 countries around the world, which is about 5 billion facial frames. And we did a study recently where we looked at some of the cross-cultural differences. We found that women smiled 40% more than men in the US. In France and Germany, women smiled 25% more. And in the UK, I don't know if there are any Brits on here, there was no statistically significant difference between men and women, which is very interesting, right?
It is.
So we're still, again, I think what's truly exciting about this technology is that it also, in psychology and how we do psychological research, it provides a new type of, it provides a new way of collecting this data as opposed to surveys. So at this point, we just have a lot more questions than we have answers, but it's really fascinating. We also, one key difference between the work we do and some of the psychology research is that this is real people in their homes, on their phones, watching content or playing games or driving their cars. So it's very spontaneous data. It's not acted. It's not just college students taking a study.
Mm-hmm.
So it's truly, it's truly global. It's a truly global data set. And there's a lot of questions to ask of that data.
So another question is, I'm interested in how we might train AI to pick up on sarcasm or other intentional mismatches between expression and meaning.
Love that question. And again, that comes back to why this is so complex, right? You know, if you're listening to the words that are being said, but also monitoring the expressions and also maybe the tone of voice, and you see a mismatch between these signals, that's when sarcasm, you know, that's when, for example, you can tell if the message is sarcastic, right? If I say something sounds serious, but I roll my eyes, and you can detect an eye roll, you know, that could be an indicator of sarcasm. The technology is nowhere near that. It's sarcasm is a pretty complex state, and it does require this multiple modality integration, and we're not there yet.
So someone asked, tell us about the emotional hearing aid. Can you recognize condescension in speech?
So the emotional hearing aid is the project we built at MIT for autistic kids, which was essentially, you know, this pair of glasses with a little camera. The camera was facing outwards, and it would detect, you know, the expressions of the person you're interacting with. So Sarah, if I were wearing it, it would be reading your expressions in real time and feeding me, you know, saying, oh, she looks interested, or she's not so interested, she looks very bored or confused, you should ask her a question. Like, it was a real-time conversational coach. But it was, the version we built was primarily just looking at your face. It did not do any vocal intonation analysis. I think that would be so powerful. And I don't know if anybody's doing that. So I'm going to make a note to suggest that. So the company that is commercializing this right now is Brain Power. And that would be a great kind of additional source of information that they could look into.
We have another question. Have you explored applying your work to dementia support, particularly at the threshold of a dementia? Dementia quickly glides into emotions, which become the core of nonverbal communication. Support for care partners could help greatly.
We do not do any work with dementia, but I'll share a story, which I love for a number of reasons. So about 4 years ago, we got an email at sales@affectiva.com. And it was this high school student, Erin Smith. She was watching, I think she was a junior, maybe a sophomore or junior in high school at the time. And she was watching a new segment on Parkinson's. And she noticed that the facial expressions of the patients seemed off. So she went on Google, found us, and emailed us. And she was like, I want to use your technology because I want to look into Parkinson's. And I remember our head of sales was like, I don't know what to do with her. Like, she probably can't afford the, you know, the technology. Like, what do we do? And I said, I don't want to stand in the way of an ambitious, you know, young scientist. So we gave her access to our API, and she disappeared for about a few months and came back. And she had partnered with the Michael J. Fox Foundation and ran a study on 100 patients. And she found that there were actual facial biomarkers for Parkinson's disease. And so she's now studying at Stanford, but she started a company called FacePrint, where she's using these signals for as early diagnosis for Parkinson's. I don't know if she's looking at other, other diseases, but I think there's a lot of potential in applying this technology in mental health and other, telehealth is another one, right? We could quantify for the first time ever patient-doctor interactions and map that and correlate it with patient outcomes. So that's another area that's very interesting as well.
This is going in a little bit of a different direction, but somebody asked, what's to prevent a determined state actor from reverse engineering your technology? When you mentioned, sort of proactively working to guard against misuse.
Yeah, the reverse engineering part, it all boils down to the data, actually, like in terms of like where the actual innovation happens. Definitely a little bit in the algorithm, but it's all about the data. So it would be harder to, you'd need both pieces to actually reverse engineer all of it. So even if you figured out how the algorithm works. You have to have your own data set, or you would have to hack into our own data. Might be possible. Yeah, I guess it might be possible. But I think the bigger question is if somebody really wanted to build this for nefarious purposes, they could. And so one of the reasons why I wrote the book, and I wrote it for a broad audience, not for an AI audience, is because I believe strongly that we all as consumers have a voice in this. We can vote with our feet. Like if we choose companies that abide to AI ethics and we say, okay, I'm going to download this app because I know that the team behind this cares about ethics, cares about diversity, but I'm not going to download this other app because they don't. I think we start to see a change in the tech industry if consumers start caring about all of these things. Also, investors have a really big role to play. When we were raising money, we've raised over $50 million of strategic and venture funding. Often investors don't really ask about ethics. I mean, I'm starting to see this change now. But I think if investors say, I want to know about your ethics roadmap. Like, what are you doing to mitigate data bias and algorithmic bias? How do you care about, like, how do you implement privacy? Then we start to see startups caring about these things. Yeah, so it's going to take a whole ecosystem of players to move us in the right direction.
So logistical question, how did you access or collect your initial data used to build the algorithm?
Yeah, we basically sourced, it was around the Super Bowl in 2011. We partnered with Forbes magazine, and we asked people, it was on the Forbes website, and we asked people to watch a number of Super Bowl ads while their camera was turned on. So we asked for their permission to turn the camera on, and say you were watching, I don't know, a Doritos ad. Moment by 15 times a second or 30 times a second, we sampled the frames of the video, and that became it was the very first time ever anybody crowdsourced people's responses over the internet. And that was the initial kind of data set that we used. So it was all, I mean, to this day, everything's based on consent and opt-in. Now in the automotive industry, it's a slightly different approach where we send people out with what we call driver kits. So we ask people to put these cameras in their dashboards or sometimes the rear view mirror and just drive around, go about their daily commutes. And it's kind of quite fascinating what you see. I remember when we first started to do this, we were concerned that we wouldn't see any interesting data because people know that there's a camera in the car. And it's kind of scary. Like there were examples of people falling asleep at the wheel, or this particular woman, she texted while driving, but she had two phones in her hand.
Oh my God.
I know, right? So yeah, so it was quite interesting, the data we got.
Pivoting from that, can you talk about potential applications to online education? Obviously, that's very relevant right now.
Yeah, that's another area which I think is super interesting. It's an interesting application of the technology. So again, imagine if you have a class of students online, you want to be able to kind of keep tabs on level of engagement, level of attention, level of frustration or confusion. And then just the way an awesome teacher would, you would be able to personalize the learning experience. So that has applications in Zoom-based kind of synchronous classes, online learning classes where you can personalize the curriculum, even areas where you could, where you have a broader audience, like a faculty member, giving a lecture to like 100 students. There's no way you're going to see 100 little faces, but maybe you can aggregate all of that data while respecting people's privacy, and I can see a real-time kind of curve of the level of interest.
I think this is in response to the last question. When collecting data, how do you measure what emotion people are expressing at the time of facial expression?
There's a number of ways we do that. Sometimes we ask for self-report if that's an option. It's not always an option because, for instance, if you are if you're watching a Netflix series, I'm not going to interrupt you every few minutes to ask you how you're feeling. So we often ask that at the end of the experience. We also have a team of our own FACS certified labelers back in Cairo. We have about 60 labelers, and their job is to watch these videos every day and code, code for the different expressions. And we usually require that 3 out of 5 labelers, or sometimes 2 out of 3 labelers, agree on the label.
So somebody says, using Zoom the last year plus, I've become aware of the fact that because I have no acting experience, the facial expressions my students and colleagues see on me reveal more than I'd like to reveal at times. Do you have any plans for emotion filters that would allow me to disguise or alter the way either people or technology read my emotions? On a similar note, have you ever worked with professional actors to see if they can fool the technology?
You can totally fool the technology, I have to say. And that is, I mean, that goes back to like what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to, we are not trying to build technology that kind of reads into your internal state. It's more around what have you chosen to express. And if you've chosen to express, your emotions visibly, then we try to capture these markers or these expressions or signals. But if you choose to, mask them or dampen them, then that's okay too. I am intrigued by this idea of a filter, though, of an emotion filter. I kind of think that's already like what TikTok has, and but it is intriguing. Yeah.
So switching gears here, I'd love to hear more about your family and how they influence the trajectory of your career, particularly your mother's experience in early computer programming.
Yeah, I think I didn't realize, growing up, the influence my family had on me and my interests. So for example, I never really thought about my mom's career. My mom's been a career woman all her life, but also it was within the confines of being kind of Middle Eastern. So she was never allowed to travel to any conferences or ever travel for work. And if she had to, then it was camouflaged as a family vacation. So we all, like my 2 younger sisters and my dad, we would just like accompany her. So she would go to this one meeting in London, right? And I didn't really like realize that until I was an adult. She was also not at all allowed to talk about her job, like once she came back home, which was timed with our coming back from school. So even though she was a career woman and a professional all her life, it was always in the context of the family and her kids, which is very different from my experience as a single mom in the US with my 2 kids. They're very much ingrained in my professional life. And so I've always been kind of aware of that. But at the same time, the message, I guess the implicit message has always been, yeah, be ambitious and believe in yourself and go out and do things. I talk about that yin and yang in the book a lot because my parents have always supported my career. But for instance, when I got the scholarship to Cambridge, both my parents, especially my dad, he said, no, you're married. You cannot go pursue your dream like that. And it was, to his credit, my husband at the time, he was the one who basically vetoed and said, you know what, this is something you're passionate about. I'm going to support you. But my dad wasn't supportive and my father-in-law was not supportive, so yeah, there's a lot of cultural nuances that I had to navigate, for sure.
What keeps you up at night running your company?
I see this question is from Eric. Hi, Eric. Thanks for joining. What keeps me up at night running my company? Definitely funding. Funding is always a challenge. But also I want to make sure that we are, that there are areas of applications of this technology that I fundamentally believe will help people. But it's not always what's top of priority for us as a company from a commercial standpoint. And so I struggle with that a little bit. Like, we're very focused on the automotive industry today, which is great, but I know that there are all these applications in mental health that can be truly transformative, but we haven't gotten to it yet. So I find that frustrating.
Do you have any recommendations for a non-technical person to develop an idea in this realm?
Absolutely. I actually really believe that you don't have to have a technical background to play in this space. You just need to have, you need to have a pain that you're trying to solve with technology like ours. A lot of the pieces of the technology are actually pretty readily available. It's more about, yeah, how do you get access to the data and what is that user experience that's going to be transformative? So, for example, if you have an idea on how to innovate what a Zoom, what the Zoom 3.0 look like with this kind of technology, I think that's pretty cool, and you don't have to have a technical background to do that.
So, possibly last question. Are you familiar with the series Black Mirror? And if so, how do you feel about that kind of techno pessimism in the popular imagination?
I haven't watched all the series, but I am familiar with some of them. Um, yes, I mean, some of them are kind of, take this technology and pull it to the extreme. I mean, even one of my favorite movies is Her. I don't know if you've all, yeah, you watched it.
I haven't seen it, but I know it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of fascinating because Samantha is this operating system and she gets to know, can't remember the guy's name, she gets to know him really well. And because she knows him really well, she's able to motivate a behavior change, and she gets him out of his depression, and he, explores life again and is excited about life again. But then there's this twist at the end, right? Of course, because it's Hollywood, and I don't think we have to go there, right? But I think the core idea of this emotionally intelligent operating system that knows you really well, I think that's pretty cool. So some of the ideas are cool, but then they're taken to the extreme, which I think we ought to avoid as a society.
I guess that's the part that makes it Hollywood.
Right.
Well, we are about out of time here. So I want to thank Rana and Melissa again for your time. And thank you all for tuning in and showing up for authors, publishers, indie book selling, and our incredible staff here at Harvard Bookstore. If you would like to support Rana and the bookstore, click the link in the chat to purchase Girl Decoded. We sincerely appreciate your support. Rana, do you have anything that you want to add before we sign off for the night?
Just, I wanted to thank you again for hosting me and everybody for joining and for all the questions. And if you do read the book, please reach back out and share with me what resonated with you. I found that the book has created all sorts of new friendships and new connections, and I'm very grateful for that.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much and have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody.